Okay, so in this video we are going to review some of the things of the concepts and the grammatical concepts particularly that we encounter for the first time in Chapter 4. And as per usual, we are going to be embedding 3 to 4 items that when you watch this video, if you listen for those items that I'll be saying at random times, you'll be able to obviously earn for yourself a easy and free 100. So this is for those that might be absent and wouldn't be able to obviously get this in class, as well as anybody who might want to just simply review. So, in Chapter 4, we are first going to be encountering a new kind of verb. Actually, 2 new kinds of verbs. Now here what you can see up on the left-hand side are all of the verbs that obviously we have encountered so far. And I've color-coded them by the chapters in which we have first encountered them. If they are brown, it was Chapter 1. Pink, we first encountered those in Chapter 2. Purple, Chapter 3, and then red, Chapter 4. Now, over here on the farthest left-hand side, obviously, these are the 2 verbs, est and sunt, that we remember call linking verbs. And linking verbs, if you remember, are verbs that are going to link a subject to a complement, either a complement predicate adjective, CPA, or complement predicate nominative, CPN. And remember that all of the verbs that you see here are verbs that are going to be ending with T, in which the subject is he, she, or it, or some of them, as you can see, end in NT, that obviously the subject is going to be indicated as they. Now, this column of verbs and this column of verbs represent a new set of verbs, 2 different kinds that now we are encountering for the first time, like I say, in Chapter 4. All of these that you see here are referred as intransitive verbs. And all of these verbs that you see here are going to be labeled and referred to as transitive verbs. Now, what is the difference between intransitive verbs and transitive verbs? Well, both of them, including linking verbs as well, they all have subjects. And remember that the subject is the doer of the verb, the doer of the action. But for transitive verbs, they are going to be able to have what is called a direct object. Now, a direct object is the thing that answers whom or what after the verb. It is the thing that receives the action of the verb. And so when we look at some of these, he, she, or it reads. Well, what does he, she, or it read? He reads a book, he reads a magazine, he reads a newspaper. He or she or it writes. Writes what? A book, magazine, newspaper. He annoys. We want to know whom do you or he, in this case Wexat, annoys. Whereas over here, habitat, she lives. We don't want to know what she lives because she cannot live anything. So therefore, intransitive verbs are those verbs, and by the way, that is your first word that you need to put in as the Easy 100 quiz on Canvas. Verb. V-E-R-B. Verb. Said it. He, she, or it sits. You cannot say he sits a table, he sits the copier. You can't even say he sits the chair. He sits in a chair, but he does not sit a chair. And so, for all of these, if you were to think about them, they do not have the ability to have a direct object. Now, the trickiest one that is up here is one that we encounter in Chapter 4, appropinquat. It means he or she or it approaches. You might think that approach is a transitive action. A transitive action is one that transfers action onto something, because you might think to yourself, well, he does approach the copier. He does approach the table. But that is not the case. Instead, it is he is approaching towards the copier. He is approaching towards the table in the exact same way that he does not sit the chair, but rather sits in the chair. And so therefore, we have intransitive verbs that we have encountered in all the chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we have intransitive verbs, or I should say, we have transitive verbs, those verbs that can have a direct object. If I say he catches sight of, well, what does he catch sight of? Or he terrifies, he scares, whom or what does he scare? And so therefore they transfer their action. Now, clamant I've decided to put in between. That is because it is a verb that sometimes can act as though it does not have a direct object, or sometimes it can be that it does, such that you can say they shout, and that's it. They are shouting. That's it. At the football game tonight, they are shouting. Versus, they are shouting commands as a direct object. They are shouting encouragement as a direct object. And so, if it has a direct object, it is functioning like a transitive verb. If it does not have a direct object, it is functioning as an intransitive verb. Now, such it is the same over here for transitive is that you don't have to express the direct object. I can simply say, she is reading. And I don't have to say what it is that she is reading. I don't have to say it's a book or a newspaper or a magazine, but nevertheless, it still remains transitive. Your second item that you are going to be putting in is merely the abbreviation for direct object. D-O. No dots or anything like that, just the letters D-O for direct object. Now, let's turn our attention then to nouns on the right-hand side. So far, we have indeed seen nouns of three different varieties. These are what we call nouns of a particular declension. They are nouns of a particular type. We have learned first declension nouns, we have learned second declension nouns, and we have encountered what are called third declension nouns. Now, if we were to see a form of the noun with an A or an AE for singular and plural, or a US or a long I for singular and plural, or no ending whatsoever, it's just the form of the word wokes, arbor, and fragor are three examples that we have learned with no ending whatsoever, we will know that when we translate it, you don't simply say girl, you say the girl does something. You don't say girls, you say the girls do something. So therefore, unlike English, in Latin, word order does not matter. To give you an example of this, and this is the example that I gave in class. In English, if I were to say, the dog bites the boy, we know because of the word order that dog is the one doing the biting, and the boy is the direct object, answering whom or what the dog bites, the direct object receiving the action. But if I were to switch the word order in English, and put boy first, then bites, then dog, it's an entirely different action, with now the boy being the subject and the dog being the direct object. But in Latin, if we were to write some Latinglish and have dogus, bitet, boyum, it says the dog does the action, bites the boy. But if we want to express an accusative direct object, onto that direct object, you will have the endings either am, or um, or em. And these are forms that we call accusative. Subject forms, we refer to them as nominative, nominative subject. Direct object forms, we refer to them as accusative. And it's am if it is the first variety, what we call first declension, if it is the second variety, what we call second declension, and em if it is the third variety. Such that if I were to write up here the word boyum first, bitet as my verb, that means he, she, or it bites, and then dogus, the two sentences in Latin express the exact same thing, in that I know that dog is my subject, not because it is before the verb, like we do in English. I know the dog is my subject because it has the subject form nominative. And it still retains it. And so it says, the dog bites the boy. The second sentence still says, the dog bites the boy, even though we have put the word boy first. It has the accusative direct object form, and that's how we will know. And so, over here, what we see, remember, is going to be a singular subject verbs, plural subjects verb. A singular subject verbs, plural subjects. Now remember, there are 6 words of the second declension, or second variety, that do not have a US ending. They happen to have no ending at all, but they end with the letter R, and that would be wir, puer, ager, magister, minister, and liber. And then you have those of the third variety. And the reason why there are question marks there is because of the third variety, third declension, their nominative subject form doesn't have an ending. And I left that blank intentionally. That box is the form of the third declension when it is going to be plural. We have not yet learned that yet, and so we probably won't for a couple more chapters, and so don't worry about that. And so here, when we see the word wokes, it's the voice, but it has to be that the voice does something. If it were woke him, it would be the subject, verbs, the direct object voice. The tree does something. Arborim, a subject, verbs, the tree. Fragor, a crash does something. Whereas, of course, if it were fragorem, it would be a subject, verbs, the crash. And it does not matter where these words with these particular forms appear in the sentence. What matters is that obviously the form will indicate its function or role in the sentence. If it has a nominative form, subject. If it has an accusative form, direct object. One last word on all of this, returning to our linking verbs. Remember that if all linking verbs are equal signs, then that means, and we'll take sunt just for funs and giggles, it's going to be that if I were to have servi on one side, I would have to have the equivalency of plural and masculine on the other side. And so if I wanted to say the slaves are, and let's just choose an adjective, tired, it would have to be defesi. But if I wanted to say the girl, or the girls, let's go with girls since it's plural, because we get to use sunt again, then over here it would have to be defesi. If it were a singular girl, it'd be defesa. And of course we would have to change our verb for subject-verb agreement. Singular subject, singular verb. And the same thing here. If we were to turn it into servus, we have to change this obviously to an est, and thus we would have to make this matchup singular masculine as well. So this essentially encapsulates all the new stuff that we are learning now in Chapter 4. Intransitive verbs, verbs that do not have a direct object. Transitive verbs, verbs that can have a direct object. Nominative forms, functioning as the subject. The girl does something, the girls do something. And accusative forms are the forms of direct objects, the receiver of the action. The girl doesn't do a darn thing. The subject verbs that girl. The slave doesn't do a thing. The subject verbs the slave. And the tree doesn't do anything. A subject verbs that tree. And that's how we will know that it's functioning as the direct object. The direct object answers whom or what. After the verb, the direct object is the receiver of the action. The last thing that you're going to put in is the abbreviation for linking verb. Good old linking verb. LV. No dots, nothing to separate the letters, just LV. And hopefully you now understand a little bit better about what's going on in the chapter 4. Good luck.